Hey, yo, everyone, gather around. It's story time. Brought to you by the University of Alaska Fairbanks, Department of Social Work, and a Conscious Party Productions. You are listening to The Critical Social Worker, a revolutionary storytelling podcast.
A conscious party.
Revolutionizing our minds.
Elevating our consciousness.
Changing our worlds.
Your story.
My story.
Our story.
All right. Welcome to another episode of The Critical Social Worker, a revolutionary storytelling podcast. I'm your host, Christian Ace Stettler, and I'm happy to be joined by Mr. Jim Matherly. How's it going, Jim?
Christian, thanks for having me. I'm doing well. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I meant to ask this. Oftentimes when you hear like a former president or something, or a governor, you hear them still referred to as president or governor. What's the proper etiquette when it comes to a mayor? Do we call you the former mayor? Do people still refer to you as the mayor?
A good question. I actually learned about this after I left office. I still call all former mayors mayor, and they call me mayor as well. And I just prefer Jim, but if you're looking at protocol and that kind of thing, a governor is a governor and a mayor is a mayor, senator, congressman. So you just don't use former is what I've been told.
Sure. And that's what I think I kept referring to you as former mayor. And then I was thinking about it and I was like, that's actually not what I've heard. And not that I care about following the perfect procedure.
No, just call me Jim. I'm Jim.
All right, Jim. Well, you're a lifelong Fairbanks resident, yeah?
Yes, I was born in Fairbanks, and so was my mom. Actually, my mom was part of the first graduating class from Lathrop High School when they first opened. And then my grandfather, Clyde Garrity, was also born in Fairbanks.
Wow. So let's think about that on a timeline. So when were the first people coming to Fairbanks, settlers, basically the white folks? When were the white people showing up?
I've got a story for that, actually. Back in the early 90s, Felix Pedro kind of discovered gold up here. My blood grandfather, Nicholas Sajacic, was a Yugoslav Serbian from Yugoslavia. A whole bunch of Yugoslavians came over for the gold rush. A lot of different countries came over for the gold rush. He came over, so I'm really a son of a bitch, is what I really am. So, with my drum set, but I'm a bitch. So he came over from Yugoslavia, was mining. Back in the homeland, my grandmother was getting ready for an arranged marriage to come over to Esther. They lived in Esther. She didn't speak a lick of English. He was 56, she was 18. And they had to get married, and they had 3 daughters. One of them was my mother. He passed away, and then she married a local man. So Europeans, Californians, Italians, they all came over here in the late 1800s, early 1900s because of the gold rush. And that's why you see a lot of diverse, everything from Samoans to Italians to Alaskan natives to Hispanic. I mean, we've got a real melting pot in Fairbanks. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, in Alaska, I think that surprises a lot of people about Alaska in general is how many different cultures have made it their home. Even I lived up in Barrow, Utqiagvik for a while, and it's extremely multicultural. Just all the categories that you mentioned: Samoans, Tongans, Hawaiians, Filipinos, Korean, Thai, people from Thailand, everybody, Macedonians. It's really interesting to see how many different folks from all over the world have settled in not just Alaska, but in the interior and up north. You know what I mean?
If you go to a sporting match, say in Tokyo, you'll see mostly Japanese. You go to an Ice Dogs game in Fairbanks, you'll see every walk of life.
Yeah,
it's really cool.
Well, let's talk about Fairbanks a little bit and how it's changed over the years. One thing that's of interest to me is I have been in and out of Fairbanks visiting and lived there a couple times. And one thing that I've noticed in recent years that's changed, and it's always hard to remember exactly the way things were before, you know what I mean? But when I lived in Fairbanks, when I was getting my undergrad about 10 years, almost exactly 10 years ago, actually, it really resonated and felt like a college town. And I can remember there was a coffee shop over by the college that always had live music going on. It seemed to have that spirit of professors and students having conversations and things like that. And that's just one example, but there were a lot of them. And it seems like after I returned from the pandemic, I didn't return from the pandemic, but when I returned after the pandemic, it seemed like it lost a little bit of that. What do you think about that?
Well, that's a good question and a good observation, I think. There was a lot of changes when COVID hit. 30 years ago, I DJ'd in the pub at the university for 3 years. It was great. And I used to go to Wood Center all the time. And I think things ebb and flow and just change a little bit. So sometimes businesses have to close or they have to change their thing. I used to go to a coffee shop down there in the corner of University and College Road, and you go in there and have a coffee, and there was live music because I played in a few of those bands. I'm a drummer, so that's what my major up at UAF was, music education and performance major. So I'm a drummer, percussionist. I used to play in those little coffee shops. But if you're looking at strictly the last 5 years, when COVID hit, that really devastated a lot of businesses. No doubt about it. I was mayor during all of it, actually. And it wasn't an easy time for leadership or businesses or people or just anybody. It was a real tough time. So there has been some changes, but I think there's been some good things too.
Yeah, what kind of good things?
Well, I wouldn't say good things out of COVID, but one thing COVID did do, out of necessity comes invention. So, in the face of challenges, big challenges, I mean, look at what you and I are talking on. Did this even exist? Well, actually, I don't know about your particular format here that you're using, but let's use Zoom as an example. I don't think Zoom was around. Now, Zoom is everywhere and it's accommodated people who needed something during COVID. And when I was at the city, we used Zoom the best we could. It really necessitated some change and updates to people to navigate it, I think. I think it brought a sense of community back to a lot of people that spent more time face to face than apart. These are some of the comments I got when I was at the city.
And I see both sides of that actually. When I was just starting as a professor at that time, I was still in Hawaii, and I had never taught via video conferencing, or even I don't think I'd ever even participated in a video conference besides maybe FaceTime on the phone was already around. Things like that, maybe Skype with a friend back in the day,
Yeah,
something like that. And
maybe
now
Skype.
that's all I do is online on the computer. And so one of the ways in a Fairbanks and Alaska as a whole that I've noticed returning after 10 years or so is that while it's great that you and I can connect this way, as well as Alaska has such a large rural area, so many different rural areas and different peoples over a wide, vast geographical area, it allows us to connect, and we can connect and see each other face to face anytime we want. And that's obviously a blessing. On the other hand, something that I've noticed is that Alaska used to have this, I don't know how to put it into words. It used to have a culture of travel, if that makes sense, to where I'm in social work, behavioral health, things like that. And so there were always kind of conferences where we would convene in Anchorage and we would really see each other face to face. And those kind of opportunities provide something different than what you get when you do a Zoom meeting or something like that. And it has a spirit about it that allows us to connect in a different way. And I noticed immediately upon returning that some of that has went away, and it feels like for the university, for example, that we take for granted sometimes what we lose. Although we can meet anytime via video conferencing, we take for granted what we lose by being able to convene in a physical space. You know what I mean?
I could not agree more. That's 110%. And I enjoy talking with you. You're really friendly, but face to face would be so much better for me. I'm very much an extrovert and I'm very much a people person. And I like to be in front of people, with people, beside people, just surrounded by people. It was really tough for me during that 2 or 3 years of the dreaded C word. In fact, my youngest children were freshmen that whole year here in town. So they spent their entire freshman year on computer. It really changed, I think, some of the dynamics for the kids because you literally didn't have to wake up an hour before school, get dressed, get showered, have a breakfast, and drive to school. You're wide awake. Some kids rolled out of bed 10 minutes before class started. And I think it really made an impact on a lot of the kids and the teachers. Everyone did the best they could, but you can't replace the face to face. Unless, of course, like you just said, you're in a different village and you've got to communicate over this. Even this is better than nothing. And I think that this state has really embraced some of the long distance conferencing. There needs to be more. It's something that the governor is working on is, Wi-Fi for the whole state. It's hard to connect our state. In fact, a lot of people don't realize how big and massive we are. We are a ginormous piece of land with people spread out hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles apart. It's something to think about.
Yeah, I think that it's also has tied to money, right? It's going to be hard to justify things to send a group of people from wherever they're at all over the state to Alaska and pay for that when you can convene via Zoom, right?
A lot of stuff boils down to money. You're absolutely correct. You have Zoom when you can, you have in person when you can. I think there's good and bad to both. And I think that there's places for both. If it's a short meeting, do a conference call, participate by Zoom. I do some of my meetings by Zoom, and I do some of my meetings in person or conference call if they don't happen to have a camera. But I think accommodating more people has brought more people into some of these meetings. I'll tell you right now, I had a meeting last week of the veterans, local veterans group at the governor's office. We had more participants on Zoom than we did in person because they were from all over the state. So I think it does serve a good purpose.
Yeah, I think that the important thing is that we don't take for granted what we lose when we go to something like video conference. We don't just give up the in-person thing, which it's easy to slide and give away those things for convenience or for efficiency or money. You know what I mean?
I do. I hear you 100%.
Yeah. Well, what other changes have you seen over Fairbanks over the years? Where are we headed?
Well, actually, the outlook is not too bad right now. We're bouncing back a little bit from the COVID. If you look at the numbers put out by Explore Fairbanks, which used to be the Fairbanks Convention and Visitors Bureau, there's more conferences being held here now. There's more big bookings being done. There's more groups traveling here from all over the world. We're pretty uniquely positioned in Fairbanks that will always be a romantic stop for travelers. And in fact, even if we were to have taxes up here, which we don't have a sales tax, but as an example, if we did, it would not necessarily shoo away travelers. You don't come all the way up from Australia and worry about a 2% sales tax or a 1% sales tax. They're going to come here anyway, because you've got to make a commitment and you've got to have the money to come here. So I see more travelers. There's even some more building. There's a couple new restaurants being built. Now, keep in mind that Fairbanks is 30,000 people. And this is Fairbanks. And there's not a lot of places to build out anymore in Fairbanks, unless you tear down an existing structure and put a new one there. Most of the development's happening outside the city in the borough. So you got borough government and, city government, city boundaries, borough government, borough boundaries. So that's why like Raising Cane's is out in the borough. And all the big box stores are out in the borough because the city is pretty much built out. Same with houses. There's not much more to develop in the city limits unless we were to get larger, which won't be happening. So there's going to be some growth. You know, Amazon just opened their store here, their packing place. So now there you see Amazon Prime vans going around. All that is helpful. As soon as the Polaris comes down, which will be next summer, they're going to sell that land and hopefully someone will develop a really good downtown structure of some kind. Maybe a mix of retail and retirement homes or condos or housing of some kind. I'm just not sure. But see, I'm an eternal optimist. You're going to discover that about me. I try not to be a Donnie Downer because every city is going to ebb and flow. You're going to have some up times and some down times. Most of the time for me, though, the positive outweighs the negative. So every time I see a new influx of military people coming, I see more opportunities for growth and that kind of thing. But then on the other hand, you look at tonight's meeting at the school board, and they're taking the vote on closing, I think, 6 area schools. So you've still got the nervous bunch and you've got the positive bunch, but you're always going to have this ebb and flow. Fairbanks has taken good care of me all these years and a lot of other people that stayed.
Yeah. And something in this modern world that we're in, this ever-changing world, something I'm a big fan of is returning to the local, to being more connected to things. But Alaska's unique in this way is that if we're saying being connected to more to our food and producing food locally, well, Fairbanks obviously has extreme temperatures and can produce a lot of food in the summertime, but it's not a great place for agriculture, for raising cows or things like that. And so how do you see that fit in where we're getting to this global? It's great that that you can order something from Amazon. You could probably order an avocado from Amazon if you wanted to. But on the On the other hand,
Yeah,
often
but why?
many places, like if we were to compare to Hawaii, for example, Hawaii is a place of should be a place of abundance in such a way, but they're getting 85 or 88% of their food from off island, off the from out of the islands from somewhere else. So what do you think? How do we find that balance of the local with the global?
Jeez, it's a huge subject, and you never stop trying to find the balance. And one of the things the governor is looking at is food security. That's really a big project for him. He has a year and a half left to help cement more things that he would like to get done. One of them is food security. Maybe that means vertical gardens around the community. Maybe that means helping more local growers, giving them a tax break, incentivizing them for growing. And there is a lot of growing that can be done in Fairbanks. You got to get the right people to do it in the right environment with the right buildings with the right incentives. So, in fact, you're hearing about food security all over the state, not just up here. But think about Fairbanks. We can get stranded just like that. Fiber optic gets cut and we're cut off from communication. A huge earthquake happens and we're literally landlocked. So we've got to have food security. If you can't get trucks in, you can't get the train up here, you're in deep trouble because we don't have riverways bringing things up. We're not a port town. So you've got to have food security and you got to have ways to store it, manage it, and stock it up. I do know that the local Fedco, which I don't know if you've heard of before. It's the Fairbanks Economic Development Corporation. They're an arm of, not really an arm of government. They're funded with some government money, but their job is to bring in local business, to incentivize people to open a business here. And they've done a lot over the years. And one of them is on food security, growers, farmers, things like cattle and beef and milk and vegetables. So there is some work being done on that. In fact, I've got an email for you. I've got a report I can get my hands on and send it to you, just as a topic in case we ever want to visit again. I'll make sure you get some of that stuff.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Well, let's return back to being a college town and university for a little bit. How do
Mhm.
you see the university playing out as we move forward into this future in Fairbanks? Do you see it being able to return to? Let me give you one example that's simple for me. When I was a senior, I would spend a lot of time on campus, and it was so busy and bustling that I couldn't find a bathroom to use. Sometimes, I'd be looking for a bathroom, and I'd be stressed out because I think, oh, where am I going to go? And I'd try to go up to the upper levels of the library or something like that to try to find an empty bathroom.
Oh,
And
geez.
and when I returned, oftentimes when I'm going up and down the stairs and whatnot, it's empty. I'm only hearing my own footsteps. And that's a bit of an exaggeration. I'm not saying it's always empty. There's plenty of good people that are, moving around the university, but it's nowhere near what it was. And I think that that's important for Fairbanks. What do you think about that? How important is the University of Alaska Fairbanks to Fairbanks? And do we need to make a push to get back to that bustling campus atmosphere?
Yeah, no. In fact, the two things that I think that make our town special are university and the students that come here and the research that's done, because we're a world-class research. I've had tours of those areas, including the data center. I mean, we have a lot of great things up at the university. President Pitney has her hands full because it's really, really hard to get funding for all the campuses, especially the campus I think is best is the Fairbanks campus. And the other thing that makes Fairbanks special is the military. We're a military town for sure, and we are a university town for sure. I don't know the enrollment right now, and I'm not an expert, Christian, on how many there were this year and how many are this year. So I can't deep dive that, but I've heard it talked about quite a bit that a lot of it boils down to funding and a lot of the issues the university has, of course, like any other public building or building of education is deferred maintenance. Deferred maintenance is always huge. And I've sat in some meetings of the trustees, university trustees board meetings, and it's always focused on repairing what you have before you add over here. What's the lifespan of this? How do you replace this boiler? You've got to put money aside. And how do you do that? Well, you got to collect it. You got to you got to get tuition payments. You got to figure out who's going to fit in what and what you have to do to those buildings. The university is incredibly important. In fact, I think it's probably more important than UAA. No offense to that campus. I think University of Alaska Fairbanks has more to offer because we're in a tougher location and we have more focus on sciences and research, I think, that other universities do, just because of our position on the north slope, or closer to the to the north and this whole area that we're in.
Yeah, and I was just made a visit to UAA, and I hadn't been to UAA since I was a teenager. And I do think that UAF is a nicer campus. It's more beautiful in its own way. Like I can. There are some areas on campus where you can see the whole valley, and even in the midst of winter, you get that sun just coming up over the crest, and it's just absolutely
Mhm.
beautiful. But one thing I did notice is UAA did have more traffic going on. It seemed to be more of a bustling campus atmosphere.
Well, you're right close to, a hospital. You're right close to, Diamond Boulevard. You're close to all these busy roads. My sister lives right up the road from it. And I mean, it is just congested all the time where it's located. But that's where it's at. So it's always busy. And I don't know how much of it is university, how much is other local businesses going around there, including clinics and whatever else. It's a busy, busy place for sure.
Yeah, one of the strengths I think that University of Alaska Fairbanks still has, and seems to be growing, is the involvement of Native folks from around the state. That I think that presence still seems to be there. They have the rural student RSS, rural student services. That seems to me when I go there, it seems to be have what it has seems to have going on. What I wish the rest of the campus oftentimes still had going on. These spaces for community and organization. And again, I'm not dissing everything because I don't know everything that goes on
Right.
the UAF campus. But what do you think about that? How important is the Native community to Alaska? And also, not even just for Native folks that are from and live in the area of Fairbanks and the borough, but also Fairbanks seems to me a gathering place. That's where I was a part of Rural Human Services. That was mostly Alaska Native folks from around the state. It seems so incredibly valuable. And what do you think about that, as especially like as your experience in mayor and stuff? How important and how do we make sure that we're not taking for granted the native people and native cultures in Alaska and Fairbanks?
We have a lot of um, what's the word I'm thinking of? Cultural meetings in this town. And when they have Friendship Day, over at Pioneer Park, which I still like to call Alaska Land, you've got such an array of people that live here. And one of the greatest things that I experienced when I was mayor for those years was interacting with the Native community and learning about the different, you know, gatherings of people and where they come from and what's important to this group is different from this group, and then when I went to Juneau, I got to meet with Native leaders from all over the state. They're extremely valuable. They've been here longer than me. I mean, they know Alaska history like no other peoples do. And it's really important to incorporate Native values. I know the university is really big on that. Every time I go up on campus, I see either different flyers or different things for different people, because you want to be inclusive, of course. So the Native population is extremely powerful and extremely well loved. I also know that there's a lot of challenges for the Native groups out in some of the smaller villages. How do you help a village whose school just burned down? How do you help a village that doesn't have a single law enforcement officer? you know, we want them to come to Fairbanks. And a lot of time when AFN, Alaska Federation of Natives, would come here, they'd pick a city each year to go to. They would come to Fairbanks. There'd be hundreds of natives from all over the state. It was so much fun meeting them and interacting with them because they're funny. They're funny. They're humorous. They have their meetings. We have great stories. They're great storytellers. And I always found that to be really interesting. But you have to ensure that these villages are well taken care of because some of them are really, really small, Christian. I mean, 100 people or less. And how do you take care of small villages with such a small number of people with not much commerce? What do? You present opportunities for them, give them a place to come to, either a hospital to serve them, a campus to come to, a native meeting where they can come to town. You always have to keep trying because we're such a huge state. It takes a lot to get all the way up from Barrow, like you said, down to Fairbanks just for different meetings.
Mhm.
And if the weather's not good, how do you fly it? I mean, it's really a challenge to live in Alaska.
Yeah, matter of fact, my first experience in Alaska outside of visiting as a kid once was going back to Barrow, Utqiagvik, and we got halfway there and the plane turned around, and it happened 4 days in a row. So I was with a friend, an elder friend of mine, and he showed me around Fairbanks. And Fairbanks takes some heat sometimes, but I have a soft spot in my heart for Fairbanks, and I think it does have a very unique culture. And yeah, some people can rub me the wrong way sometimes, but for the most part, people seem to be able to be themselves in Fairbanks, and I've always appreciated that. No matter how eccentric someone is, they seem to be able to find a place, if you know what I mean. There's so many opportunities, whether you want to live in a dry cabin or you want to be a part of the city. It seems like there's a place for most people.
I think you're absolutely right. You can go live in a dry cabin, and and every place you live is going to have its share of knuckleheads. You're going to have knuckleheads everywhere you go. I was in Anchorage recently. There's some knuckleheads, but the good people in Fairbanks far outweigh the knuckleheads, in my opinion. You're going to have brush ups. You have that many people living together in a landlocked city. Now, we haven't experienced 50 below for weeks on end like when I was a kid, but when the ice fog is so thick and it's so cold outside and we're so landlocked, you've got to help each other out. You put aside the differences. You've got to be able to help people. You got to jumpstart that guy's car. You got to pick up this person if they're walking down the road. I mean, I think Fairbanks does that better than most places. That's just my opinion. I've been one of the people that have been helped when I got a flat tire, and I've been one of the people that actually helped as well. I think that there's a real sense of connectivity in Fairbanks, aside from when there's occasional brush ups, which there always will be. But when the thermometer hits cold or it's really hot outside or someone needs help, you see folks helping along the way. And look what they do at cleanup day every year. In the spring, you've got literally tens of thousands of people out there picking up trash to beautify the city. And that's folks coming together.
Yeah, they do a good job with the trash thing, because one of the things I was surprised on one year, a couple years ago, it was just the snow had just melted. It was just had all just run off, and I was like, oh, there's a lot of trash, but that's kind of inevitable when the snow piles up for so long. And then
Mhm.
the next week it was gone. It was just completely gone.
Well, what boggles me is I don't ever like take a cup and throw it out my window. And I look sometimes, I wonder, where does all that come from? I don't see people physically throwing large bags of trash out of their car, but yet when the snow goes away, there's so much trash. It just boggles my mind how it all gets out there. But I guess people do sometimes litter, or it flies out of your back of your car, or crows are ripping it up. I mean, I don't know, but there's a lot of it.
Yeah, it can happen fast. I had my neighbor in Fox. We were not my neighbor, but the neighboring house was being used as an Airbnb, and some of the people would not obviously understand that you can't leave a trash bag out there because the ravens will get it fast, and it takes about 10 minutes, and the trash should be spread everywhere. And then if you have another blanket of snow, you don't know about it till it melts.
No, that's right. That's right. And they're big. Those ravens are big and they're strong. They're fascinating,
Yeah, smart.
but they'll scratch your car too. So don't leave it in the back of your truck. They will scratch the heck out of your car.
Yeah, that was one of I can't remember when it was, but one of the most fascinating things I'd ever seen in my life probably was in Fairbanks at the Westmark Hotel. Somebody had a thing of peanut butter in the back of their, but had a little Ford Ranger or something, and there was a bottle of peanut butter in there, and I saw the raven open it up, twist the cap off, and I was like, that's impressive. If they
Never
thought
seen that before.
themselves or whatever. Well, one of the negative things that I've felt about Fairbanks in recent years is we can segue this into alcohol, because when I was in undergraduate, I guess the proper term would be a binge drinker. I'd go out and have drinks at the many bars and whatever with friends, and I had some good times and whatever. And now I've changed, so I'm a little bit more reflective on it. And I've read several things about, I think a few years ago, I read an article about a shooting at, I can't even think of what the hell it's called. The big bar that's changed its name several times.
The Big Eye.
No, not the Big Eye. I saw that
The bo-
shooting recently too. We'll get to that in a second.
there's the Botel. There's the Big Eye. There was,
The-
I worked in all the bars in this town 'cause I was playing drums in these bars. So
Maybe it'd be better
yeah,
to call it a club, the
yeah.
big nightclub, and it has a one of those, the Spur. That's what it's called now. Yeah, had read about a shooting there, and that one didn't surprise me at all, just because I'd been there previously and I'd seen kind of how you got a lot of men and a little bit of women, and you got certain attitudes ramped up high. So that one made more sense to me. But then I had seen a shooting at the Big Eye. What's the one next door? The Midnight Mine. There was one there recently. And I was thinking, wow, I frequent in those places, and I never felt unsafe in any way, shape, or form in those places. And I haven't frequented those since I've been back, so I can't speak to what it's actually like in there. But that's alarming, the violence that you might go to a bar and get shot outside. You know what I mean?
You know, again, when I was mayor, I don't want to simplify it with this sentence, but I have to start somewhere. You just can't control everybody. You can't control the knuckleheads. You can't do it. And I know the people that own the Big I, not the Big I, well, the Big I too, but the Spur, they really ramped up their security. So there's less problems there. For a while when I was mayor, we had some issues with some soldiers that would go in there. So what I would do is I would just call the commanding officer, he'd have a meeting with the soldiers, and we bring it down. Because what happens this is my opinion, a problem might be low, it might be a level 3 problem. And then you have one or two shootings and it kind of gets a lot of attention. It goes up to a 5 or 6 and then eventually comes back down. You'll never wipe away these problems. And I think some people catastrophize it a little too much by saying, oh, there was a thing there, I'm never going again, or what's going on with this town happens all the time. Well, it really doesn't. Sometimes it might come in a little bit of a 2 or a 3, and then it goes away for a while. And then you forget, then you move on to this other problem, whether it be speeding or drunk driving. But you live in a town where, guns are legal, but there's more good than there are bad. And so I think that when you hear those things, you've got to call the police, you get them involved, you arrest the shooter, which they have, and then you adjudicate it and you put them in jail if they belong in jail. I think with drinking, I think drinking is our number one problem in the state. I think our number one social problem in this whole state is alcohol. I've felt that way for a long time. And you can't go shutting bars down willy-nilly. In the city of Fairbanks, if you have a liquor license, we are maxed out for the city. I can tell you that. Again, I use the circle as an example. We can have X amount per capita, and all the rest are out in the borough. Okay, if you want to open a bar, it doesn't mean that, Christian's bar can't be sold to Jim and Jim owns the same bar, of course, that you didn't add a new liquor license. But once you're maxed out, you're maxed out. And I know that when we would approve liquor licenses, we encouraged bar owners to supply food or somehow have a menu that helps. More of a social, might be more of a sports bar than a strict drinking and nothing else there kind of bar. You know what I mean? But you can't close these places down unless there's heavy violations and someone's breaking the law. But you got to take the issues that come up, the brush ups that occur, correct them, increase security if you can, because it's hard for 42 sworn officers in the city of Fairbanks to be in control of 30,000 that live in the city, but we're never a town of 30,000, Christian, never. We're always 40,000 or 45,000 because so many people coming in from the borough and the military bases. So for a town of 30,000 plus 10,000 more at any given time, it's just hard to control all of that information. That's why bar owners need to put in cameras, good cameras, outside and inside, so we can help catch people. Okay. But they're going to happen. And when they happen, you have to find them quickly and you've got to try them and you got to take care of them. Make sure they don't get a gun again. Make sure they go to jail. If you see something, say something, because there's more patrons and people than there are law enforcement. There's just not enough anywhere you go, really.
Yeah, and I to go back to what you said about, you don't hear many people say this, that they think that alcohol is one of the primary or the primary concern in Alaska.
It is for me.
Yeah,
I think it is.
I teach a substance abuse class, and people want to talk about all sorts of things. Sometimes fentanyl is obviously an issue, different areas, different things going on.
Yep.
But when you look at, there's a little pie chart, and you look at the cause of deaths in Alaska, alcohol takes up a huge chunk, and I think tobacco takes up another chunk of them.
But let's look at it this way. When you look at a pie chart and you say, what's the cause of most domestic violence? It's alcohol. What's the cause of most traffic deaths? It's DUI. Now, there is DUI with marijuana. I understand there's different intoxicants that can bring you to certain levels, but it's the drinking that's the majority of it. It's the most socially acceptable. It's been around forever. More people drink, I think, than smoke. Cannabis, let's say. I think, and every time I DJ a wedding, and I have 42 years, thousands of gigs, I've always wondered to myself, how many of those people are driving home? No, that shouldn't be driving home. I think drinking, and of course, it's devastated a lot of the villages. It has absolutely devastated a lot of the Alaska villages. I spoke to AFN one time, and when I was mayor, I was asked to be a speaker. And instead of going up there and doing the typical, we're glad you're here, spend all your money here, we need the commerce, which I think is not right. I talked about how the abuse of alcohol and other drugs is devastating your communities. And I said, it's not a Native issue. It's not a white issue. It's not a Black issue. It's an Alaskan issue. And we've got to chase the drugs out of our communities, including what you just said, fentanyl and meth. And, you didn't have fentanyl and meth when I was in high school here. The drugs have gotten stronger, more of them, let's say. And I remember the Native groups were absolutely in agreement with me because I was just saying it outright. Because my daughter is an addict and has been for 18 years now. And I used her as an example. I said, even a family of the sitting mayor can have someone who's an addict. My daughter's been an addict for a long time, Christian. She's lived on the streets in Seattle. She is meth addicted, and I've put her in and out of rehab 4 times, but she's 30 now, 34, and I don't have any control over her, unfortunately. It grabbed her, and I hope she can find recovery. But to me, those drugs are just devastating a lot of our state. And liquor's right up there. That's how I feel about it from my experiences.
Yeah, it definitely is. I think it's one of those things that are sometimes taken for granted. Oftentimes I'll go to something like some kind of orientation. I don't want to put anything on the spot or anything, but I'll go to an orientation or something like that. And some of the people that are presenting or leading it often talk about alcohol in such a lightweight manner where it causes, or where it's I don't know if you could say it causes, but it contributes to so many problems. You mentioned the domestic violence. It's one of the leading causes of death. And so I think that one of the things Alaska and Fairbanks can do, and it's hard to say how this exactly comes about, but it's just being more honest about it instead of kind of, look, because culturally it's been accepted for so long. And I'm not saying it should be wiped out. I'm not saying any of that
No,
stuff. What I'm saying
me
is
either.
that we should be more honest about it and be more open and have more conversations about it before we're encouraging people to partake, if that makes sense.
You weren't here I was here in the 70s and the 80s, and we had a whole string of bars in downtown Fairbanks, and I played in some of those bars, and they were owned by some people and managed by some people who didn't care how much their patrons drank. And the owners and the bartenders and the people in these bars do have a lot of say in what people get and how much they drink, and what they're served and how much they're served. It kind of starts there, because how do you determine who's drank too much and who hasn't? When I was mayor and cannabis was legalized, while I was in office, they got voted on, and a lot of people said, "Oh, this guy's going to fall to the ground, and we're going to have junkies everywhere." And I met with every one of the cannabis growers prior to the vote to get to know them. Sam Hatchie and his brother are really good friends of mine, and they're really fun. And take a guess how many Fairbanks Police Department vehicles were sent to cannabis shops for problems over the bars? Zero. Every cop call was either domestic violence at somebody's home or to a local bar, never to a cannabis grower. So that just goes to show you right there. Yes, cannabis raised a lot of eyebrows. A lot of people voted against it. It passed. Now you have to regulate it, which is fine. But bars and liquor are always going to be one of our number one statewide problems, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah. Well, correct me if I'm wrong, because think I saw this a long time ago, but I thought I saw you say something a while back that you had never partaken in alcohol or drinking. Is that true?
Yeah, that's true. Uh, I kind of joke around with it with like I have 5 sons, and I don't have a fun story to tell them of, you shouldn't do it because of this. Dad jumped off the Polaris building with a parachute. I have nothing fun to tell them. All the sips of beer I've ever had in my life, which I've tasted beers, would probably total 1 beer, and then I take communion at church. I was raised in a family of alcohol, and so I made a choice when I was 17 to never do it, and I never have. And I don't preach about it. I don't force it on other people. I'm not a prude because I DJ and people like to drink and have fun. I have just made that decision for me. So never smoked, never drank, never tried drugs other than stuff prescribed after surgery. Otherwise, I've never been near it. And that's something I did for me. How you live your life is up to you. But I chose not to.
Is that something so if you think about like when you were younger, when you were a kid or even a young adult, did you always know that you just weren't interested?
Yeah, pretty much. Because I did see it in my family quite a bit, and I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to be out of control. I was scared of it for a while, but then when I became 16, 17, 18 years old, I was playing in a heavy metal band. I played in an Iron Maiden cover band for a while. I had longer hair, and I was playing around town in different bars. I was practically handed whatever I wanted. Here's a pill, here's a this. And I said, I'm just not going to do it. And it's not because I was, I have some abuse on me, someone beat me up and was drunk, nothing like that. I just remember vividly sitting with my cousin saying, I'm going to choose to not do it. And I'll tell you another reason why, in case you're interested, because I knew it ran in my family, and this probably goes a little too far. I didn't want to tempt fate. In other words, I didn't want to try and then instantly fall in love with it. And what if I did? And what if it grabbed me the way it grabbed some other people in my family? That's probably overreactive because part of me over the years have said, geez, it'd be great to have a good steak and do a glass of wine like people, some connoisseurs do. And they, do this with the wine glass. And I've never done that. And I don't know if I'm missing out or not. I don't really care. I just choose to stay away.
Sure. I respect that. My story is actually similar, but the opposite of yours in the sense that I wasn't too interested in alcohol as a teenager or a young adult. Not saying I never partook in any of it, but I just wasn't that
Mhm.
interested. And I got into all sorts of shit and was selling and using methamphetamines as a very young adult for a very short time, really, when the big scheme of things, for like less than maybe less than 18 months or something like that. And then afterwards, I went through some recovery process and whatnot, and started drinking. And don't get me wrong, I've had plenty of fantastic social situations where I've had a great time and we're able to connect with people. Even in Alaska, there's some value to go into this random bar or the bar that's in
Yeah,
the hotel, and you can or even the airport, and have a great conversation. I don't know why you can't do it without alcohol too, but it's a good setting to go sit down and strike
I
up
agree.
a conversation and stuff like that. But just like when we're talking about, you have a melting pot in Alaska, and then you have all these different people from different backgrounds. Well, if everybody gets drunk, then there's very likely to be some kind of problem. And just like that with my own situation, I had problems that I hadn't resolved. And when I put down too many and got to like a close to a blackout or something, I never did anything that terrible, but I'd find that I'd make mistakes or have a terrible hangover when I had another responsibility, you know what I mean? And so I'm at a point now where I can partake a little bit, but I don't have any interest really in like the bar scene or anything like that. I try to stay away because I know, um, I know who I am, and I don't even want to go to it. I got too much going on, a family to take care of and stuff like that. You know what I mean? It's not worth it to me.
I have great stories of DJing gigs, watching people do crazy things. Now, that's enough for me. But it's just something I never did. And that's why it was really tough on me when my daughter went down that path. She wasn't raised around it with her father, but you can't control everybody after they get to be an adult. You just don't know what people are going to be drawn to. You don't have any way of knowing. You can only try to impress upon them some of the dangers. And she chose that path. And we just talked last week for the first time in 6 months. It was great to hear from her. And she's trying to get clean again. But it's just held on to her for so long. And she looks so much older than she is, which is really sad. But all I can do is pray for her and talk to her as much as I can, let her know that I love her, because I do, of course. I don't like what she's become sometimes. And it's really brought my emotions up and down quite a bit, as you can imagine. But I love my daughter and I hope that she can, find her way out.
Yeah, it's one thing about addiction that I've learned, and I think my family learned when I was going through it, is it's got to be that person's got to. It's their deal. There's nothing that you can say or educate them. There might be things that plant a seed or something like that, but it's got to be the choice. And I think it's deeper than a choice. But you know what I mean. You got to be that individual. A lot of codependency and stuff going around like that. Well,
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And like I said, there was nothing. And the big thing at Lathrop when I was going there was probably cigarettes and pot and drinking. You just didn't see a lot of cocaine or method or fentanyl. A lot of this has just been made over the years and developed and created. You know what I mean? And it's just I learned a lot of stuff when I was mayor. A lot of stuff that scared me. Um, but it's there, and you have to do something about it. You got to do the best you can.
yeah, and where there's money to be made, people are going to prey on that kind of thing. I
Oh,
had done or
money.
written a paper on meth back in the day, and I was very surprised to learn that when I can't remember exactly, but I wrote this in 2000, probably 12 or 13, and so it was before that, and I was surprised to learn that they had come down and they had gotten rid of a lot of the local meth labs, like your trailer in your trailer, in your bathtub or whatever. And the meth use actually went up because it brought an opportunity for outsiders to bring it in. And
No,
so there's people that are preying on it. And I've heard a lot of stories and rumors. And I actually know people in Anchorage that have died that have got shot and killed in the drug trade. So it's a dirty game, and I hope that we can move forward, especially with the stuff like fentanyl that it's one thing to take something that can harm you over time, and it's another thing that you make a mistake and you take too much.
something that fits right there on the tip of a finger can kill you.
Mm-hmm.
On the head of a pin. Yeah. And again, it's hard to control everybody and everything they do. You just have to try to find it and stop it in every way that you can. You can't stop. Like I said, you're going to go up, you're going to go down. You're going to go up, you're going to go down. It's hard to wipe it 100%. So you got to keep trying.
Mm-hmm.
Never stop pushing, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, I've been pushing off politics, so let's get there in just a second. But I
Okay.
have one more question about, substance abuse. I was when I did my undergraduate internship I did it at a place called Leap Alternatives to Violence over there on Airport Road, and working with domestic violence offenders. But as you said, a lot of domestic DV people are going to have problems with drugs and alcohol. And there was one case where I had a guy that I was trying to help. He was a meth addict, shooting it up every day, and I guess I won't get into too many details. But he seemed like he genuinely wanted help, and I was trying to get him into rehab. And it was really, really hard to find him a place that was going to work, that could be affordable. I tried everything. I can't remember all the groups, but I tried. There was church organizations. There was the rescue mission. There was, I even tried, I can't remember what it's called, Rainforest Recovery or something in Juneau. I tried Washington, and it was hard. And I think there's one of the people I respect, his name is Dr. Gabor Mate, and he'll say, we're often asking why the drugs, but sometimes we got to ask why the pain, because if they're willing to do that, well, what's causing them so much grief and so much pain that taking that drug is better than at least how they perceive the alternative of sobriety or not using, or we might say the real world. Where are we at in Alaska and Fairbanks now in that regard? Has it improved, do you think? Are there
It's improved. It's improved a lot. When I first got elected mayor, this was in 2016. The problem with the local mental health help and addiction help was that it was all in their silos. And so I got together with some of the local groups to bring together all of the groups. There was like 30 people in one room. And the thing is, A and B might overlap by this much, and B and C might overlap by that much, and C and D are this far apart. And how do you find out where everybody's going to go? Because in this town, you're not going to go to one building where they're all located. You go, Christian, you go to room 1, you go to room 2. Everybody was splintered, and it was so hard. So we started when I was mayor. We started a housing homeless coordinator for the city, and part of their job, and that was Mike Sanders, and part of his job was to gather up all of these nonprofit groups, all of these mental health care folks, and get them together in one room to start talking. I can do that. We do this. We do this. That was so difficult to corral all of that because it's so overwhelming. You don't know where to go. You just don't know. And then we opened up the sobering center, which is off of Airport Way. We were getting really good with that. But of course, everything boils down to funding and how do you keep it open and how do you put the right amount of people with medical degrees there? Because, some people can't diagnose, others can. We are much better off than we were. There's enough beds for everybody in town who needs one. We haven't had a cold weather death in a long time. Those used to happen quite a bit. They're not as common now because there are places for people to go. If you're in a homeless camp or you're on the street or you need a place to go. But some of the things to remember is it's not against the law to be homeless, and not everybody wants the help because we've experienced that. Secondly, if they go to a place and there's some violence that erupts, they don't want to keep people that are violent. How do you correct it? And if you can't lift the hood of the car and find out what's going on, you can't stop a car when it's driving and fix under the hood. You got to stop the car, let it cool down, and look under the hood to address the problem. So if somebody's really on edge, how do you stop them, calm them down long enough to get into their hood, to get into their head, to find out what the issues are? It's not always easy, but we're better than we were. We're definitely better than we were. But there's so many people that want to help, but it's overwhelming. Where do I go? But that's why they still meet over at City Hall every month. And these 25, 30 organizations say, this is what we're doing. We've got this grant. We're doing this work. We can help these people. And they cross-pollinate quite a bit. So there's a lot of that that goes on too. A lot of people don't see it. So they think that we're just swimming our feet, but it's just not true. Because one of the greatest things I ever learned in politics that I'll never forget is there's work you see and there's work you don't see. There's the people that are out shoveling the snow right now and plowing. But what they're not seeing is the people back at Public Works repairing the blade, fixing the engine to get it out in the road. So there's always work being done. There's that you don't see, and there's work you do see. So remember, just because you don't see it doesn't mean there's not something cooking in the background, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thank you for that. Well, let's shift gears and let's go over to politics. There's a question in the chat from Star, which can bridge us over there. She says, where do you see the biggest needs that grassroots organizations can work to meet in the interior? So I'm guessing, outside of the government, what can grassroots organizations do?
Yes, there's a lot of great grassroots organization that does a lot of great things in our community. And I would say one of the top things they can do is just helping some of the folks that need help in the way of homelessness, in the way of trying to find them a spot. There's a group of people in town that go down and feed people who are downtown. They can't give them a bed. They can't really provide them with anything or transportation, but they take food downtown and they give it to the folks that gather. So there's always ways to help people. Two of the greatest things I think that people can do in this town are vote and volunteer. And I would say go to the soup kitchen. I know they do a lot of good work down there. Hannah Hill runs a great organization at the soup kitchen. Go to the food bank and help, and maybe box up food, maybe work on delivery of food. You may not necessarily have to invent something, but go to something that's working and volunteer there. But if you really want to get involved and it has to be this one lane you want to get in, call the city of Fairbanks, find out when their next housing homeless coordinator meeting is, and just go to the meeting. They're public. And you go and you say, I want to help. What can I do? Because just like someone who wants to find the help might be overwhelmed, what Star just talked about is, she wants to help. Where do you go? Where does Star go? Well, go to that group and find out what they need for the help. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Appreciate the question, Star.
Thanks, Star.
So let me say this. There are people in the audience, and if you came to ask a question, we're running towards the end somewhat here. And if you have a question, feel free to pop it in the chat or feel free to try to call in if you'd like. So we're heading into new presidential administration, obviously. Lots of different changes, lots of grumbling back and forth. One of the biggest issues that are coming up is the rollback of DEI. And I think one of the places that it really concerns me is I don't spend too much time on social media, but I do see some people with some power that are really negative about it, if that makes sense, and kind of going overboard. But you also have one of your most controversial moments. You had some people that were upset with you about the decision about, and I've only heard this secondhand, so I don't know all the ins and outs and details. But you had the incident, right, where what was the bill that was supposed to go through?
It was an equal rights bill in 19. And the thing is, when you look at the title of a bill or an ordinance or anything, there might be some items in it that you don't like. And that happens all the time, whether you're talking about a city council or a borough assembly. And I think that some things need to be tweaked because, and you mentioned on social media, because that's really kind of what it is. It's a necessary evil, and I do use it, but I use it strictly to help people around town. I keep my page very vanilla. If you drive in the ditch on the right, off the road, and you drive in the ditch on the left off the road, you're going to ruin your car. You're going to have a really crappy drive, and it's going to drive you crazy, and not much can get done when you're driving in the ditch. The only choice you have is to get on the road where it's smooth, Christian, and fight for space on that road. It will never be equal. It's always going to do this. Most people, in my opinion, most people live on this road, sometimes to the edge of the pavement or in the middle. The problem is both sides went too far in so many ways. And I'm not saying the right didn't do it. I think the right and the left both went too far. I just do. And if you go too far, I think that the political rubber band can only stretch so far, and eventually it's going to snap on back. And I think that it takes sometimes some reset. And that's, I think, where some of the DEI issues came into place. There was just too much of it being pummeled on people all the time. And I think some people needed to maybe back off. Even some even some liberal people that I really like, such as Bill Maher, who I think is very funny, even though he doesn't really like, a lot of people on the right. Even he has said, we've got to get out of the ditch on some of this stuff. Some of it's gone too far. And that goes for the right. And I can name some people on the right that drove me crazy. They don't represent me. I try to go to the road as much as I can. You're never going to get everything you want. So if you came to me, Christian, you said, look, Mayor, I want these 10 things. And I said, look, I can't give you all 10. How about if I meet you at 6? No, if you don't go all the way to 10, you're a jerk and a homophobe and a bigot and then everything kind of crumbles. Well, no, come to me and say, okay, I can live with a 6. How about 7 instead? Okay, I'll tell you what, I'll meet you at 7.5. And you get that done and you move on to the next thing. What has hurt political discourse in many cases is the all or nothing. And that's the example I just gave to you. If you say to me, it's all or nothing, Mayor, all or nothing, or I hate your guts and you're terrible and you don't deserve to be in office, we're going to cancel you. That's where it goes too far. There was simply too much of it all the time. And you can only do that to people for so long before they get burned out. The other day, Stephen A. Smith, who the sports commentator, and he drives me a little nuts. He's very opinionated. He was on Bill Maher, and he said something interesting. He said, even with the indictments and the 2 impeachments and his bloviating, for a lot of people, he seemed closer to normal than some of the people that were clobbering him on the left. And Bill Maher said exactly right. He kind of agreed. So nobody's got the perfect answer for everything. But I would say if you're in the ditch, get out of the ditch. If you're going to be elected and lead from the ditch, Christian, you're going to have a kind of a really annoying elected life. It'll be a little lonely. You won't get a lot done. If you don't get on the road, at least somewhat, and try to get on that road and see some compromise, it's going to be really hard for you. That's my view after being elected for 12 years in a row. I just knew that if I was in the ditch all day, it would be miserable and you won't enjoy it. You just simply won't enjoy it. So that's kind of where I think some of the rollback and the blowback is happening. And certainly diversity is important. It's important to our state. We've got diversity everywhere we look. But is it being forced? Is it being measured? How is it being measured? That's where sometimes it goes too far. That's just my opinion in my experience. And some people may disagree with me, and that's fine. I don't mind disagreement.
Mhm.
Disagreement doesn't mean I hate you, by the way. If I disagree, it doesn't mean I hate your guts. It just means we have a difference of opinion.
And we do have trouble with that from all areas in today's political landscape, is not being able to have a dialogue or conversation in a way where we're trying to learn from each other. We want to do and I get it to some degree, it's the social media world where we want to do the aha moments and catch somebody and this or that. But I think the real way through it is us talking to each other, from my perspective. And, I host in my courses, I host talking circles and other things. And for the most part, everybody gets along. But there are times when there's disagreements or everybody doesn't see on the same page. But in my opinion, that's where the seeds are planted of growth together, the coming closer together. You hear somebody else's perspective, you hear a story, you hear maybe something somebody went through in a negative way that you didn't know or didn't understand. And it brings us closer together. I have several students that are very concerned about the rollback of DEI. That beyond that as well, I've got former students that are reaching out to me, say, "Hey, can I meet with you, professor?" And they're saying, along the lines of, "I don't know what to do. I don't know what to expect. I'm hearing this and I'm hearing that, and I'm afraid and I'm concerned." And one, I wonder what do you say to them about the rollback of DEI, and specifically, how do you see it? Because Alaska is a very unique place. How do you see that the rollback of DEI affecting Alaska as we move forward?
Listen, I think a lot of people are going to perceive it in themselves, what they think the danger might be. I can't live their life or know from their shoes that they walk in. I would tell people, be careful how much you catastrophize because you might be blowing it up a little bit too much. Again, and I'm going to say this like I do every time, both sides do it all the time. Okay? Both sides do it. I'm not singling one group out, but the DEI is mostly concerning the left more than the right. I'm only using that as an example because I think that's mostly who we're talking about. And whenever there's a new administration of whether it be Biden, Trump, or anybody else, they're going to have that initial growing pain. I would encourage people to don't take everything like it's the end of the world. Let it smooth out. It takes time to change course on a boat or a car. Okay. Because I think what'll happen is they'll try to roll back, and maybe that's just a way to pull back on it and say, let's work on this, to see what's created out of that. If it could be a little bit more fair-minded and not so far one way or the other. America is young. It's only 200 and some years old. We don't have centuries like Japan or China or Russia or Egypt. We're very, very young. When 330 million people live in one place and all have freedom, total freedom of pretty much anything you want to do, then you're going to have brush-ups all the time. I'd rather work through the brush-ups than lose the freedoms. You can go to the White House and hold up a middle finger. It's your right to do it. If you go to other countries, you might get that finger cut off. And I'll say this, America has made mistakes, no doubt about it. That's the beauty of constitutions and amendments to the Constitution. You can pull that stuff out and you can change it. And we've done it. America's made mistakes, but America is not a mistake. It's a great experiment that is still being worked on and will be for a long time until we've had centuries behind us. Christian, that's my opinion. And I think you got to be patient and let it work through. Because most of the time, local is where things happen. So not so much what Trump will do today or Biden did today. It may not even make it up here in a very meaningful way. You know what I mean? Where the rubber meets the road is where you live locally. And I was talking to a friend of mine about America, and I said, I can almost prove to you that America is the best place to live. And he goes, well, go ahead, try. His name is Dan. I said, because nobody's leaving and everybody's coming. Everybody's coming here because it's free, because they can come here. And it is a compassionate place. And there's no other melting pot like America. I mean, there really isn't. Everybody, we tax our own citizens, send the money to other countries. Does any other country that you know of tax their citizens and send it here? Just think about that. It doesn't happen. So when people get really riled up, just remember the good things about America. There is plenty to love about America. And there's more people that are not in your bus. So if you're going to be in politics, and this is what I learned when I first got elected, I would say to myself, geez, a lot of people don't ride in my bus. I've got to expand my thoughts out of just my own bubble. And that's why I met with everybody. And on the city council, there was 3 conservatives and there was 3 liberals. Thank goodness for that. I would hate to have had a council with all conservatives or all liberals. You have to mix it up, but you have to be able to let the other team talk and hear what they have to say. It doesn't mean you have to agree. It means you can give and take and maybe give them a little bit of what they want. But I think what we should not do is stop talking. Just like you said, the minute you stop talking, bad things will happen. And I think when it comes to DEI, I think that some of it went too far. A lot of people did, in my opinion. That's just my gut opinion. Others may not share it. And I think you saw that in the elections. A lot of people just said, enough, please. Let's re-steer the ship a little bit and see what happens. So I say people just wait it out. It's only been 2 weeks. Let it roll. Now, when it comes to me, I look at it more than just DEI. I look at it what's good for the state. I try to take the focus off me for a little bit and say, what's best for our state? And historically, for the state of Alaska, Democrats, by and large, have kind of shut us down a little bit. They tend to want to lock things up, and that's just how it's been. That's just common. Everybody knows that who's lived here. And Republicans tend to want to open up the state. So for me personally, in my political life, I vote for Republicans because I want to open up the state to more development. Now, the next governor may not do that. If they're a Democrat government, it's always going to do this, always. But while I'm here and I'm living here and I'm elected, I'm not going to look at people like Christian and say, I hate your guts. I'm not going to do what you say. Get out of my face. I'm going to say, I appreciate what you had to say, but I have to make a decision and I have to go A or B. I appreciate what you had to say, but I can't go with you on this. I'm going to do this. And that's the best I can do. And if that's not good enough for you, that I can't worry about that. And I'm not trying to sound cold. I'm just trying to give people a reality here that it's not all about them. They have to look out for what's best for the state, for the country, for your community, and for the whole country. They're just still very young. We have a lot to learn and a lot to do in this country.
Mhm. Have you seen any, because you mentioned that it's just taken place and to let it unfold. Have you seen anything that's happened? Have they been cutting jobs? Anything that you're aware of in that regard in Alaska at this
No,
point? Nothing from that.
nothing's nothing's touched us. I mean, you know, again, you have to be patient and let it kind of roll out. And and even if somebody says we're going to stop this, somebody else can come along and say, well, you can't stop that so quick. You're going to have this unintended consequence, and you kind of pull back on it. We've got a whole new set of people now in leadership. You have to kind of let it flow as best you can. Yeah, pay attention to it, study it, learn about it. But, you don't want to, sometimes you don't want to talk too fast and, you know, put your foot in, especially if you post a lot of stuff. I think that's where a lot of people go wrong. They post stuff that they wouldn't normally say in the heat of the moment. It's like going shopping when you're starving, going to Costco. I say, eat a meal first, then go to Costco. You'll buy less. You won't buy stuff you won't need. And if you think about what you're going to post, maybe you'll say stuff you wouldn't normally put out there. Then it's out there forever. And then you got fighting and you got screenshots. That's one of the things that turns me off about on social media, but it's here to stay. And you got to be careful with that.
Yeah, well, you think as much as social media can connect us, right? You could go and see what lots of different people say and think about things. Is that we still end up in echo chambers on the right
Well,
and the
not always, but a lot of times we do. Yeah, but not every time. But yeah, a lot of times we do.
we
Yeah,
can, right? We can end up
we can.
in an echo
It's you're vulnerable to it. You're vulnerable to it. That's right. Even me.
And I think when we talk about many topics politically in the United States, including diversity, equity, and inclusion, often we just say DEI. Those are three really big words that mean similar but different things that are all very big, widely encompassing, many different kinds of programs, ideas within themselves. And so one thing that I don't like is when we reduce it to just calling it by an acronym, DEI, and then some folks might say it's necessary and it's all good. And on the other side, you might have DEI is bad and it's terrible. And for someone like me politically, and this is not just with DEI, I'm talking about everything. I consider myself nonpartisan. I was a Democrat for a short while, and I became disillusioned in various ways, and we don't have time to go into all that. But I think that again, we end up in these. We can have these echo chambers, and we can have all good or all bad. But from my perspective, where I try, and I have my own blind spots too, I'm sure. But when I look at DEI, I see, well, absolutely it can be good. And but it could also be abused and it could also be overblown in some ways. And I often feel like I don't have anywhere to go to talk to people, if that makes sense, because if I'm against this or if I'm against that or for this or against or whatnot, then we can't have a nuanced dialogue or a nuanced conversation. And going back to what I said earlier, I believe that that's the way. Being able to have a dialogue, a circle, a talking circle, being open-minded and realizing that, hey, I don't know everything. And the only way for me to know more is to be able to listen and to talk. And sometimes I'm going to be wrong, but oftentimes we're not allowed to be wrong.
Well, here's an example, and I'll give you a quick example before we end this thing. When I was mayor, somebody came to me and said, and they were really serious. They go, "You don't hardly have any African American police officers. I think you ought to have half and half." And I would say, look, I can only choose from the applicants I get. There's going to be some applicants, some lines of work, I think you'll agree with me, that are mostly maybe a white male that might be ex-military. When I go to my stack of applications, there's hardly any African Americans. So if I'm forced to make the next 10 hires all African Americans that are not as skilled as the people up here, that's where I think DEI can go too far. I'm not going to hire them just because they're African American. What's the training? Do they have training in this? Do they have training in that? I think some people were thinking that's what they were being told. I can only choose from what I have. And we tried really hard to get more Alaska Natives into the police department, but a lot of them didn't want to be cops, or they went to work for VPSOs to be village patrol officers. Again, when you go, you see mostly this. Just like if you go mostly over to nursing, you'll see more women than men in nursing. That's just how it is. You can't force it to be exactly the same on both sides. This has been talked about ad nauseum in the last 5, 6 years. It's just not going to happen. The NBA is mostly African-American players for the most part. I can't explain why. I'm just telling you that's what I see. And for some people, that's a racist comment. Well, no, it's not. I'm stating a fact. That's what you see. If you go to the villages, you'll see a lot of Alaska Natives. That's an observation. So I think when you force it and say half of your police force has to be black or you're no good. Well, I can't do that because I don't have that many applicants. You know what I'm saying? I can only choose from what I have. If I want 40 cops, I got to take the best I can get from this I have. I can market more women in the police force, more blacks in the police force, more natives in the police force. But I think most police forces will be mostly Caucasian for the most part, unless you're in a different city where there's a higher black population that does that. Maybe in Georgia, maybe in this. I'm just trying to give you examples. And I told this person, I can't force that. I just literally can't force that. I need to fill the police department with the best police officers I can get from the applicants that I have in front of me. And we're trying to get more of this and more of that, more of this, but I can't force it. I can't delay hiring those people until more African Americans apply because you don't know if you'll ever make that quota. That's where quotas come in. And quotas can be a problem. If I told you as a cop, you have to go out and write 20 tickets every night, that's your quota. That's a bad way to police. That's just, you can't do that. That's where quotas come in. And I saw a little bit of that when people got a hold of some of these DEI things. They're quoting this and quoting that. You got to be careful and not get in the ditch too fast. You have to be as fair as you can be, but it can never be equal all the time. It just can't. It's impossible with this many people living in one place, all with different skills.
Yeah, and I know Alaska's unique
Strengths.
in this regard. It's set up away from the continental United States, obviously has completely different dynamics. But what would you say are good ways to achieve a more equitable, if we're talking about police, a more equitable workforce rather than a quota? Because I'm with you. I don't really dig the quotas, whether it's with traffic tickets. I grew up in Utah where there were quotas, and you knew not to drive at the end of the month because that's when the quotas were full. But what do you?
The only way you can do it is to go to the Native organizations like we did and say, try to help us get recruits. You use your connections in the villages and try your best, and we'll train them. And you go to the local NAACP and say, try to find us more diverse candidates. You go out and you ask. But we're in Fairbanks, Alaska, and you're just not going to find all that all the time. And we've hired from out of state before. We've tried. But I'm just using that as one example of one guy that came to me and said, if you don't have exactly half or a third Native, a third African American, a third white, then you're not equal. And I just had to argue with him and said, that's unfair to say that. I can't force applicants to apply, and I just can't. And finally, after about an hour of talking, he kind of understood where I was coming from. You just can't force that. And when too much of that is forced on people, that's where people need to back up and go, okay, maybe I'm pushing too far. I'm stretching that rubber band. I better bring it toward the middle where most of us live, because rubber bands don't maneuver very well here, right? You got to come here for the rubber band to be soft again so you can work it. I use a lot of analogies, but that helps my mind. I talk to a lot of graduating seniors, and I mentioned the ditch thing. Kids understand the ditch. You drive in the ditch, you're gonna have a hard time. Get on the road. It sounds simplified, but it does make a good point. If you're in the political ditch or any kind of ditch, you're gonna have a tough time.
Yeah. Well, I think in social work, for example, they've had to different levels of success. They've had more of a grow your own approach, trying to find ways for folks from the villages, from the rural areas to come and get a degree so that they can be a social worker or whatever the equivalent of that is.
Yes.
And go home. Do you see that with like police or anything like that? Because to me, that's a great way to be more equitable.
Of course.
If you're having the local population going and getting educated and taking these jobs like social workers and police, then it's going to reflect the population more so.
100%. You're never going to match your makeup 100% of the time. So get that out of your head. If you live constantly on the 100% all or nothing, you'll frustrate yourself beyond belief. You got to do a little give. You have to be a little realistic. I'll say this, we have more women cops now in Fairbanks than we had before. And there's been more people applying, which is good. You have to seek them out. You have to find them, but you can't force the finding. You can't You just have to keep going to different police forces, say, how did you do it? That's where HR divisions come into play. When I was at the city, I gave our HR director a whole lot of leeway to say, well, find out about how to recruit more diverse applicants. Maybe not just military, go to this, go to this. But if they were diverse, um, but not qualified, do you hire them to force a quota? No, I don't think that's good. Then you put people at risk, right? You just don't. So you do the best you can. The thing is, there's no perfect solution, Christian, but you never stop trying. You never stop looking. You never stop trying to do it. But it's just going to be difficult. And if you're not quite there, it doesn't mean that you're a lousy department or a lousy leader or someone who doesn't care. Again, we have to get out of the all or nothing thing that we're in. I think that poisons the mind. I think every leader in Juneau is trying to do their best. None of them are going down there saying to themselves, I want to ruin the state. None of them are. They just have different ways of getting there. And if you badmouth people, you might be asking them for help a year down the road. So be careful in this small state, because it happened to me a few times. If you want to get help, it may not be no, it might be no for now, but not no forever.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned being qualified. And so one way that you can obviously mitigate inequity would be more folks that are qualified. So what do you think more on the educational level if you thought about like affirmative action type of things at the university per se, not in a necessarily hiring for the skilled job, but for the university to ensure, let's say, more Alaskan Natives to be qualified for certain positions. And I think they've done that in different ways, like through the behavioral health aid programs and whatnot, where they change the qualifications a little bit so local folks can be practicing at home. What do you think about that, like affirmative action type stuff, but in helping folks become more qualified?
I'm not an expert on that, so I don't really know. I think if you change things to get in one group but not another, you're kind of on a little bit of a fuzzy line. You have to be careful. I've heard some things about affirmative action. If you lower standards for this group but not for that group, then it can be perceived as, choosing one group over another. You have to be careful with that. Again, it's probably all how it's written down and how it's implemented. So, but I'm not an expert on the UAF side, so I guess I don't have much comment on that. But I think if you can get a little bit slippery if you say, if Christian and I are equally in every way qualified, but you're a different nationality, so you're going to get it automatically. It might be slippery because, who knows? I mean, it may look bad. And the same with if it would be me. Again, there's no perfect answer because every employer is different. Every program is a little bit different. Equality is just one of those things that equal means the same. How do you make everything the same? It's just really, really difficult. And I think if your life's work is you have to make it the same, make it equitable at every level of every strata of life, that's a pretty big task. So be careful how you pummel it, because I think if you pummel it, then you have blowback, and then it can hurt your cause rather than help it. Both sides, left and right.
I appreciate your answers. There's another question in the chat I want to get to before I let you go. Kirsten says, when I was growing up and a young child, I felt that there was an unsaid rule that you wouldn't ask someone who they voted for and whatnot, similar to not asking about someone's weight. Currently, with the growth of social media and technology, it seems that is not the case, and I know almost everyone's political views, even without asking. Families and friends are publicly ending relationships over it more and more, which I don't remember that happening so prevalent when I was younger. Do you see this evolution as detrimental or something to adapt to?
Oh, it's detrimental. I agree with Kirsten. I lost a few friends when I was mayor, and that really broke my heart. It really did. There's a few that sting even now, and they didn't like me just for maybe this decision or that decision. And you see it a lot now, especially with Biden and Trump and Kamala. I mean, it shouldn't be bad. As a Republican, I should be able to say the word Biden, and a lot of them don't want to do it. They're scared. I respect the office too much than to do that. And when it comes to unsocial media, okay, let me say it again. When it comes to social media, you're going to have people that would say things they wouldn't normally say in a group. And when I was in high school, I didn't have 24-hour news constantly drilling in my ears all the time from every talking head imaginable on every topic, every hour of the day, from every walk of life. there is such a thing as a little bit of too much information. And then the second you try to rebut it and you post in anger and you post in haste, you're going to have problems. I wish more people would do the 30-minute rule before they post if they're mad. But Kirsten's right. And even though I think it's bad, it's here to stay. And I think you got to just swim through it. And when I lost a few friends, I said, well, I'll try a year and try to get back with them. And if they're okay and they apologize and I apologize, we make up as adults should learn to do, then everything's cool. But if they don't come back, then they're lost. Sometimes you just don't have a choice but to write people off if they're just going to separate you because of this thing. So again, there's no easy answer. And I think that where it gets overboard, if I'm a school teacher, I shouldn't be, hammering into my students who to vote for and where to worship. I think that goes too far sometimes. And I think or a coach or something. I think you should be careful when you're doing that in a public school. And you do have some of that sometimes. And I think that that's a fine line you should be careful of.
Yeah, as a father of young children, I'm often surprised about that, and it worries me somewhat because we're
Yeah,
a unique family with unique ideas and beliefs and
I
culture.
saw
And
your family. You got a beautiful family.
I appreciate that. Well, one last question on the broader landscape of politics and the
Yes.
Trump administration is one thing that worries me, and this worries me with when the Democrats are in power too. When Democrats are in power, maybe I could affiliate Bill Gates, who scares the heck out of me. And I don't have time to go into all that. But then with Trump coming in, I see also billionaires, different ones, but billionaires. I know he met with Bill Gates, but I see billionaires like Larry Ellison, who then I'm watching a video of him and he's talking about putting us all under surveillance and this and that. And what do you think about that? The big money getting into politics, and it's in both administrations in similar and different ways. But that's something that worries me is this, I've read 1984. I know, the idea of having and we probably just have that right here anyways on our phone, but you don't need the surveillance. But what do you think about that and the big money? And sometimes some of those guys have some ideas and some ways of, philanthrocapitalism and all this stuff that is scary to me. And I'm pretty optimistic as well. Like you, I think that things tend to work themselves out in different ways, but I don't want to be under control and I don't want to be under surveillance.
I'm not too worried about it. I mean, and I'm not trying to sound flippant about it. I mean, I do think of it, and I already know that I'm looking at you through my phone, and I just know Apple can record me. And I know if I'm online, I'm going to get tracked everywhere I go, even though I have a VPN on my computer. I get it. They're going to know where I'm at. And I would say part of that lies in my hands. Who am I visiting? Where am I going? And it's my own fault. I've got to police myself too. I'm just not, I'm just not the kind of over worrier about that kind of stuff, Christian. And it's not because I don't care. It's because I don't want to live my life in constant fear of surveillance and looking over my shoulder. Because I want to enjoy my life while I'm here. It's a short life for a lot of us. I don't want to live my life in total. No, I just don't. But I do try to be realistic about it. With Gates, I don't know much about what he did when it comes to vaccines and why is he pushing it on people. I didn't do a deep dive into that. And when I look at people like Elon, if he's able to find some wasteful spending, which every government has, okay, I'm all for that. Give him a little time. It's only been 2 weeks. He's already come up with some pretty good examples of money that's being wasted. I mean, you'd like it if your wife said, you were wasting money over here, let's cut back. It's better for the family. We got a big country with a lot of money going out. So if that's his contribution, we'll see where it goes. But you have to kind of see where things go. And if it gets to be illegal, then you remove them and you try them and you get them out of the way, kind of thing. I'm not overly worried about it, but I do hear all about BlackRock and about this, and I'm constantly pummeled over it. But I've got to make my own mind relax every now and then. I can't immerse myself in it. That's why I've got so many hobbies and I've got kids, and I try to find other things that help fulfill my life than to constantly be on edge. So if it surfaces and becomes a huge issue, I'll state my case and my opinion. But most of the time, I try to let some things roll that I have very little control over. I don't have any control over what Trump does today or what Biden did the other day. I don't. But I have my own community, going back to what Star said. I've got my own things I can do in my community to help my corner of the world. And I just got to let some of the big guys take care of the stuff that's there, because that's what they're there for. Sullivan, Murkowski, Begich. They're my voice for there. Does that probably isn't even an answer you're looking for, and maybe that's just not really an answer, but I just don't. For me personally, I just want to be able to live my life in some peace, but also help. So I find my own rhythm to it. And as far as big money, you're never going to stop big donations, or people talk about term limits. I think term limits you don't need term limits because you're taking away people's freedom of speech. If you want to run 20 times and your people vote for you 20 times, I don't think it's fair to take away that choice from those people. They'll elect you if they want you. If they don't want you, they won't elect you. That's how I look at term limits. I don't think it's good to force that because you're taking away the choice from someone, the freedom of speech, where they spend their money and with the choices that they make. The candidate's corrupt, they'll get voted out eventually, and the other team will win. So I think it's a little bit risky. So hey, that's where I'll leave you.
Yeah. Well, we could have a whole conversation on that.
Yes, we
Well,
could.
let me leave you on a lighthearted note.
Thanks.
You said you were DJing for a couple decades at least, right? I can't remember how many years you said.
43 years.
43 years. Wow. Well, I've dabbled in a little DJing myself, not so much on, the party level or the wedding, but on the radio. And,
yeah. I did radio for 20 years though. So I have a good radio background too.
It's such an enjoyable thing. It's an enjoyable activity. Having the people call in and requesting music and thanking you for bringing music to their to light or for playing something they hadn't heard in a long time. I love it. And
yeah, me too.
I was a little surprised. I thought Fairbanks would be a little bit more of a music town, and I may not have just broached that, so I may just not have been out of the circle, but I couldn't find a record store, and it didn't feel like radio was that strong. But tell us a little bit about, what that did for you, what that did and does for you, and what kind of music do you play?
Well, I DJ weddings all the time, and weddings are a jukebox. If you're on KSUA, you're going to play album cuts. You're going to play a cut off, Def Leppard's second album at the very end, and you could do that. But for me, I'm a jukebox, and jukebox plays hits. So I got a wedding this weekend. So you're going to hear "Best of My Love" by Emotions. You're going to hear some Bee Gees. You're going to hear some Bruno Mars, and you're going to hear. And I'm going to do a prom here in a couple of weeks. You're going to hear mostly of the new stuff. Chapel Roan. You're going to hear Dua Lipa and all these others. So I've got to keep up on all of it too. And I just love helping people have a good time through the music. And I think that's helped me with leadership too. I think it's helped keep me balanced. So I'm not so obsessed over all the negative that can occur. I'm also immersed in music. I mean, if I turn around, this is just a portion of my 20,000 albums. Then I got a painting someone gave me of the Beatles that they made for me. And over there I've got, more Beatles stuff, and I've got Ron Wood of the Stones did that painting back there. So I've got Charlie Watts from the Rolling Stones up there. And so I have my own way of immersing myself in hobby. Alaska, Fairbanks is a music town, and there's lots of places to see live music if you know where to look. And I do want to get a band together and try to do more jazz. I'm a jazz drummer. That's my big push. But I love DJing for proms, dances. I used to do about 100 gigs a year on my busiest years. Now I do about 30 a year because I can pick and choose and do less because my kids are grown. They're all adults, and I can do less and still have fun and keep my hand in it.
What's your last question? What's your experience on how does music bring us together? That's one of the most beautiful things of it, but from my perspective, all kinds of music. You can play it, and you could play music out on your porch or whatever.
Yes.
It's going to draw people in. You could play it on the radio, and it's going to draw people. When I was at KTUH in Honolulu, I'd have people come to the door and be waiting for me and wanting to give me gifts and just being thankful for talking about what they wanted to hear or sharing the music. It's just such a beautiful thing. And I just want to throw out a shout out to my dad because he's the one that put that through. He was such a big music guy and putting it in my mind to listen to the lyrics and what are they saying and all of that. But what do you think about that? How can we use, or how have you seen music bring us together?
Music is the best drug in the world, and nothing gets me more excited and happy than new music. And I love listening to new bands. I love listening to classic old bands. And again, rock and roll is not very old, 65 years old since Elvis was here. Again, everything is young in this country. We have so much more to do in the next 30, 40, 50 years. Music makes or breaks the party. So when I'm DJing a gig, I know I can make or break it by the attitude I have toward the crowd, getting involved with it, and playing really bad music. Nothing will ruin a party like really crappy music. So I'm going to make sure they're dancing. So at the end of the night, they forgot about the people who make movies. They just want to escape for 2 hours for their troubles. They come to a party and I'm there. They're going to dance and have fun and dance the chicken and YMCA and just be goofy. Because most people that go to weddings in this town don't go out clubbing. We don't have a lot of clubbing clubs in this town. So they don't get to listen to music in a loud setting very often unless they're at their house. But then again, it's all their favorite albums. But when they come here, they're going to dance with their friends. It's like when you go to a horror movie, is it more fun watching it at home or going to a theater with 100 other people who love horror movies so you can all be scared together? It's much more fun in a group, in my opinion, because everybody's screaming and freaking out. And I do the same thing at a gig. So I get really worked up about it. So this weekend, we're going to have a lot of fun at this wedding because everyone's going to be dancing, forgetting their troubles, and bringing everyone together and singing their butts off.
Right. Well, it's been a pleasure.
Thanks,
Jim.
Christian.
I thank you for coming on, and I know it's a heightened political atmosphere, and so I appreciate that. Takes some courage to come on and put yourself out there like that. So I appreciate you, and I wish you all the best, and I hope that we can stay in contact one way or another. And if I ever need a DJ, I'll know where to look.
I'll come back and talk to you anytime. Best to your family.
Yeah, you too, Jim. Take care. And
Thanks, Christian.
yep, have a good day.
You too.
Bye.